7:14 a.m. Vinton County, Ohio. Tuesday, March 17, 2026. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel lane, half a mile off State Route 93. Overgrown pasture on three sides. A rusted mailbox at the road. Curtained windows on every floor. From the outside, nothing moved. Then the porch door came off its hinges. 14 operators from the FBI hostage rescue team breached in a single stack, flashbang punching through the mudroom in under 3 seconds. Behind them, Homeland Security Investigations agents, Vinton County Sheriff's deputies, and a child rescue specialist unit out of the HSI Columbus field office. The timestamp on the breach commander's radio log read 7:14 and 22 seconds. 90 seconds later, a false wall behind the mudroom pantry came down. What agents found on the other side of that wall would generate a federal case file running over 400 pages. 19 victims recovered alive. 4 adults taken into custody without a single shot fired. At the center of it all, 2 words scrawled on a propane driver's route sheet on a cold February morning. Wrong draw. That notation, written by a driver named in federal documents only as a cooperating civilian witness, started a 9-day investigation. The resulting search warrant was one of the most carefully constructed the Southern District of Ohio had processed in years. A utility anomaly. A school district gap. A grocery loyalty card pulling formula at 2 in the morning. 3 separate threads, each thin on its own. Braided together, they were enough to bring 46 days to an end. This is the reconstruction of how that happened. The propane driver's name does not appear anywhere in the public case record. Federal filings identify him only as CW1, a cooperating witness employed by a regional propane distribution company servicing rural Athens and Vinton counties. He drove the same routes every 3 to 4 weeks, topping off residential tanks on a schedule set by the company's remote monitoring system. His route on February 18, 2026, included a stop at a property on Coonpath Ridge Road, a working farm account the company had serviced for 11 years. The tank sat behind the barn, 80 feet from the main house. The remote sensor had flagged it for a top-off. The tank read 61%, which the system interpreted as low enough to schedule a delivery. He pulled in at 11:49 a.m. Standard stop. He connected the hose, opened the valve, and waited. The fill took 47 seconds. He noted the meter reading on his route sheet. The tank had consumed less than 12 gallons in 43 days. He stood there for a moment, looked at the house, then back at his sheet. A property that size, a 5-bedroom farmhouse with a full basement and a detached workshop, would burn through that tank in 8 to 10 days in Ohio in February, even with a mild stretch. The previous winter's records showed the property averaging 600 to 700 gallons per heating season, roughly 1 full tank cycle every 18 to 22 days. 12 gallons in 43 days was not a measurement error. It was impossible. He wrote 2 words in the notes column of his paper route sheet. Wrong draw. His company's protocol for anomalous readings was a supervisor callback, not a law enforcement referral. He made the callback. His supervisor logged it and moved on, but the driver did not move on. He had grown up in rural Vinton County. He knew this stretch of Route 93. He knew that property had been occupied. He'd seen the mailbox stuffed for weeks, 2 cars in the yard, curtained windows, but no heat signature that matched 4 adults living through an Ohio winter. The numbers did not add up. Something in him understood that when numbers don't add up at a rural property, you don't dismiss it. He called the Vinton County Sheriff's Office that evening. The deputy who took the call noted it as an informal welfare concern and logged it for follow-up. What the deputy did not know, and what the driver could not have known, was that the FBI's Athens resident agency had already been sitting on that same address for 11 days. The Athens Resident Agency is a small satellite office of the FBI's Cincinnati Field Division, housed on East Union Street. It operates with a lean complement of agents and covers some of the most rural terrain in the eastern United States, the Appalachian foothills of southeastern Ohio, a region with limited resources, sparse cell coverage, and communities where privacy is cultural and institutional visibility is low. In early February 2026, Special Agent in charge of the Athens Squad, identified in court filings as SSA Renner, had flagged a pattern that did not yet constitute a case. 3 welfare check refusals at the same address on Coonpath Ridge Road. 3 separate requests, 2 from school district attendance officials and 1 from a pediatric clinic in MacArthur, had been logged with the Vinton County Sheriff's Office between November 2025 and January 2026. In each instance, deputies had driven out, knocked, received a verbal response through the door that the family was fine, and departed. No entry. No visual confirmation. No names collected. The attendance flagging was what caught Renner's attention. 2 children had been enrolled at Vinton County elementary schools in October 2025. Their enrollment had been followed by a string of absences. By December, both enrollment records had been administratively withdrawn. The school district record showed an address change filing that pointed to a Gallia County address that did not exist. A school district enrollment gap. 2 names on a roll. Then nothing. Renner had opened a preliminary inquiry file and assigned it to Special Agent Dana Kellum, a 7-year veteran of child exploitation investigations with prior HSI task force experience. Kellum had subpoenaed utility records, DMV registrations, and property records for the Coonpath Road address by the 2nd week of February. The utility records showed something interesting. Power draw was consistent with a heavily occupied structure, well above average for a property of that size. But propane, which the house used for heating, was barely moving. The property was drawing electricity like a warehouse, and gas like a ghost house. Kellum had noted the discrepancy in her working file. She had not yet been able to explain it. Then, on the morning of February 19th, a welfare concern call from a propane driver landed at the Vinton County Sheriff's desk. A deputy mentioned it to Kellum during a routine check-in call. Kellum pulled the driver's route sheet within the hour. 12 gallons in 43 days. She sat with that number for a long moment. Then she called the Athens field office and asked for a meeting. Multiple systems nearly caught this. The school attendance office, the clinic, sheriff's deputies, but each one fell short. The welfare check protocol was designed for quick confirmation, not investigation. It required only a verbal response, not visual confirmation of the people named in the concern. 3 times, a knock at the door produced a voice. 3 times, that was enough. In SSA Renner's later congressional briefing, one line stands out. The House answered. The House said it was fine. One detail from reviewing this file: the school district attendance system had generated an automated anomaly report in December, flagging the 2 missing enrollment records. That report sat in a queue for 16 days before a human reviewed it. 16 days. Small bureaucratic gap. In this case, it meant nothing. The investigation was ultimately triggered by other means. But the gap existed. It still exists in that system. By February 20th, Kellum had briefed SSA Renner and initiated a formal case opening. She requested HSI involvement based on the potential scope of what the utility anomalies implied. The HSI Columbus resident agent in charge assigned 2 child rescue specialists to the joint team within 24 hours. The team now had a propane anomaly, an electrical anomaly, a school district gap, and 3 documented welfare check refusals at the same address. They needed more. On the afternoon of February 21st, Kellum drove out toward Coonpath Ridge Road herself. Not to approach the property. The investigation was at a stage where any visible law enforcement presence at the driveway could compromise what they were building. She parked on State Route 93, 2/10 of a mile short of the gravel lane turnoff, and observed for 40 minutes with field binoculars. What she noted in her surveillance log: 2 vehicles in the gravel area beside the house, both registered to individuals whose names did not match the deed holders on the property. A dark-colored pickup truck and a white panel van. The pickup was registered in Lawrence County to an individual with no connection to Vinton County in any database Kellum had pulled. The panel van registration had lapsed in September 2025, nearly 5 months prior. No movement at any window during the full observation period. The curtains on all visible windows were heavy, not the kind of thin curtains that filter light in the afternoon, but blackout material, the kind that absorbs it entirely. Even in the late February afternoon sun, not a sliver of interior light leaked through any opening. She noted one more detail before she left. The exterior of the property showed no firewood stacked near any entrance, no cordwood on the porch, no split logs along the barn wall. In rural Vinton County in February, that absence is almost as anomalous as the propane number. People who heat with wood have wood visible. People who heat with propane and use none of it do not have a ready explanation for how they are staying warm in an Ohio winter. She added the observation to her working file and drove back to Athens. 2 days later, on February 23rd, Kellum coordinated with the County Utility Authority to obtain a more granular breakdown of the electrical consumption records. The standard subpoena had returned monthly billing totals. The supplemental request she filed asked for meter read intervals broken into daily increments, going back 90 days. The daily interval data came back on February 25th. It showed something the monthly totals had obscured. The electrical load at the Coonpath Road property was not consistent across the day. It spiked between approximately 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. and dropped substantially during daylight hours. A structure drawing electricity as if it housed significantly more people than were officially present, but drawing that electricity almost exclusively in the middle of the night. The property was operating on an inverted schedule. Kellum brought the interval data to SSA Renner the same afternoon. Renner's notes from that meeting, later summarized in the warrant affidavit, describe his reaction in flat federal language. The consumption pattern is inconsistent with residential daytime use and consistent with a location where occupants are restricted from visible activity during daylight hours. Restricted from visible activity during daylight hours. When this language appeared in the warrant application 3 weeks later, the reviewing assistant U.S. attorney flagged it as one of the most significant inferences in the entire document. Not because it was speculative. By the time the warrant was filed, it was supported by 4 independent data points, but because it translated meter readings into a human reality in terms a federal magistrate could evaluate. What they got came from a grocery store. The Vinton County IGA in MacArthur was the nearest full-service grocery to the Coonpath Road property, roughly 11 miles by road. A court-authorized subpoena of loyalty card records, requested by Kellum on February 21st and returned within 48 hours, showed a pattern difficult to explain any other way. The loyalty card registered to the property's primary occupant showed 4 separate purchasing runs between January 3rd and February 15th. The runs occurred between 1:53 a.m. and 2:47 a.m. Items purchased: infant formula, diapers in multiple sizes, children's pain reliever, children's vitamins, antiseptic wipes, disposable toothbrushes. Each run was paid in cash, the loyalty card used only for the discount, never for a payment method that could be traced. The timestamps were not random. They were clustered in the deepest window of the night, when the store's one overnight cashier was often occupied in the back. 4 shopping runs, all between 2 and 3 in the morning. All purchasing supplies for undisclosed occupants. For a property with 4 adults on the deed and no one else registered at the address. Kellum later described the loyalty card pull in her affidavit as the moment the investigation shifted from anomaly-driven to warrant-driven. The words she used were careful and clinical: purchasing pattern inconsistent with known occupant profile, consistent with the presence of additional undisclosed individuals requiring care. Additional undisclosed individuals requiring care. The team now had a utility contradiction that couldn't be explained by normal occupancy, a school district enrollment gap that pointed to 2 names that had been administratively erased, and a 2 a.m. shopping pattern purchasing supplies for people who didn't officially exist. They had 9 days to turn it into a warrant. What most people assume about federal search warrants is that they require a smoking gun, a wiretapped confession, a cooperating witness inside the house, footage of the crime itself. The evidence in this case was entirely circumstantial. No agent had ever seen the interior. No informant was placed inside. The entire warrant application rested on the gap between what should have been true and what the data showed was actually true. A 12-gallon propane draw. An electrical load that told a different story. A shopping cart pulled from IGA records. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. That kind of circumstantial case is often stronger than a direct observation, because it is harder to explain away. You can coach someone to say the right thing through a door. You cannot coach a propane tank to use more fuel than it used. The warrant application ran 83 pages. Kellum completed the draft on March 3rd. The assigned assistant U.S. attorney in Columbus reviewed it, requested 2 supplemental affidavits, one from the propane company's regional operations manager, confirming that a 12-gallon draw over 43 days was statistically outside normal range for a structure of that type, and one from a school district records analyst, confirming that the Gallia County forwarding address on the enrollment withdrawal did not correspond to any known residential address, and gave final approval on March 14th. The warrant was signed by a federal magistrate judge in the Southern District of Ohio at 6:03 a.m. on March 17th. Breach was authorized for first light. Before the warrant was signed, before the HRT convoy staged in Chillicothe, there was one more piece of work that rarely appears in public accounts of how this case came together. On March 5th, 2 days after Kellum submitted the warrant draft for U.S. Attorney review, she and an HSI child rescue specialist drove separately to the MacArthur IGA and requested a voluntary interview with the overnight cashier who had been on shift during at least 2 of the 4 documented nighttime purchasing runs. The cashier, a woman in her late 30s whose name does not appear in the public case record, agreed to speak with investigators in the store manager's back office during her break. The interview lasted 19 minutes. She was shown photographs of the 2 vehicles Kellum had observed during her February 21st surveillance, the Lawrence County pickup and the lapsed registration panel van, and asked whether either was familiar. She identified the panel van immediately. She told investigators that it had come through the parking lot on at least 3 occasions in the prior 2 months, always late at night, always parked at the far end of the lot near the tree line rather than in the spaces closest to the entrance. The driver, she said, always came in alone, always purchased the same category of items, supplies for someone being cared for, and always paid cash. She had assumed it was a parent who worked odd hours or kept odd hours. She had not thought much about it. Then she added one detail that Kellum documented verbatim in her case notes. The driver always backed the van into the parking spot. Every single time. Backed in, nose out, positioned to leave the lot without reversing. That is a counter-surveillance driving behavior. It is taught. It is practiced. It is not something most rural Ohioans do reflexively at 2 in the morning when they're picking up diapers. Kellum added it to the supplemental section of the warrant application that evening. A single sentence. But it was the kind of detail that, sitting alongside 82 pages of utility records and school district data, told the magistrate something about the operational awareness of the individuals inside that house. They were not simply hiding. They were actively managing their exposure. They had considered the possibility of observation and had taken steps, however ordinary seeming, to reduce it. The warrant was approved 9 days later. The operational plan for the breach had been developed over 4 days by the FBI hostage rescue team's advance element, working out of a forward staging area at a National Guard armory in Chillicothe. HRT had conducted aerial reconnaissance of the property using a fixed-wing aircraft with thermal imaging on 2 separate nights in the week preceding the warrant. The thermal passes had returned data that was the most significant intelligence piece in the entire operational planning phase. The house showed 11 to 13 distinct heat signatures on each pass. Not 4. 11 to 13. The signatures were inconsistent with adult occupancy patterns. Several were stationary and low to the floor for extended periods. One pass, conducted at 3:17 a.m. on March 12th, showed a cluster of 5 signatures in what the floor plan identified as the cellar area. In the cellar. At 3 in the morning, the advance element revised the breach plan twice after receiving the thermal data. The original plan had prioritized the main staircase and upper floor. After the thermal analysis, the mudroom and the cellar access were elevated to primary objectives. There was an obstacle that emerged 36 hours before the breach that came close to forcing a delay. The structural drawings for the property, obtained through county records, dated from the original construction in 1971. The house had been substantially modified since then. County inspection records showed unpermitted additions in 2003 and 2009. The advance element had no reliable floor plan for the current structure. They knew where the mudroom was. They did not know what was behind it. The solution was unglamorous. The team's intelligence coordinator located the propane company's service records, which included a technician's notes from a 2017 inspection documenting the location of the interior shutoff valve relative to interior walls. The notation mentioned a new pantry partition installed since the previous visit. A pantry partition that had not existed in the original floor plan. A partition that, in the thermal imaging, showed anomalous density. A false wall. The lead breacher, identified in operational records only as Team Element 3, briefed the mudroom stack on the partition's likely location. The stack would move through the door, breach the pantry partition, and clear what was behind it before moving to the cellar. It would take 90 seconds. The convoy staged at the Vinton County Sheriff's Office at 4:30 a.m. on March 17th. 14 HRT operators. 6 HSI child rescue agents. 4 Vinton County Sheriff's deputies. 2 paramedics embedded with the team. 12 transport vans, more than the operational count required, staged a quarter-mile down State Route 93 to receive the recovered victims. 12 vans with blankets stacked in the cargo areas. The paramedics had been briefed on what the thermal data suggested. They brought pediatric supplies. At 6:50 a.m., the convoy moved off State Route 93 onto the gravel lane. No lights. Vehicles rolling on idle. At 7:13, the lead element reached the porch. At 7:14 and 22 seconds, the door came off its hinges. The flash bang detonated in the mudroom. The stack moved through the smoke. Team Element 3 located the pantry partition. It was where the service record said it would be, floor to ceiling, plywood framed with a simple latch on the interior side. The latch came off in under 15 seconds. At 7:16 a.m., the false wall was down. What agents found behind the wall was a narrow corridor running approximately 12 feet before opening into a reinforced back room. The room had no windows. The window openings had been framed over with particle board and insulation, screwed from the outside. There was a padlocked cellar door in the floor. There were pallets on the ground with sleeping materials. There was a battery-powered space heater, running. That space heater was, in a single detail, the explanation for the propane anomaly. The property had not been heating the recovered victims with the main propane system. It had been using electric resistance heaters, drawing the elevated electrical load that Kellum's interval data had flagged, to maintain temperature in the concealed space. The main propane system had been run at minimum levels, just enough to keep visible pipes from freezing. From the outside, from any utility company's monitoring system, from any county assessor's inspection, the house appeared to be occupied by a small number of adults doing nothing unusual. The concealed space was being kept warm below the floor and behind the wall, invisibly, on electricity. That was the architecture. Keep the propane low. Run the heat on current. Never let the numbers at the meter tell the story the gas tank could. It almost worked. The cellar door was cut in under 40 seconds. The 4 adults in the house, 2 in the main bedroom, 1 in the kitchen, 1 who had barricaded in the second-floor bathroom, were taken into custody without resistance. 2 complied immediately. 1 attempted to reach a back window. A Vinton County deputy intercepted him in the hallway before he cleared the frame. No shots fired. No agents injured. The federal case file's first inventory entry, timestamped 7:21 a.m., lists 19 individuals recovered from the property. Their names are sealed. The youngest was documented as an infant. The age range, per the affidavit, spanned from infancy to early adolescence. All 19 were alive. The HSI child rescue agents worked the property in pairs, moving through the space systematically, while the paramedics staged at the mudroom entry. The recovery took 23 minutes from breach to last individual cleared. At 7:37 a.m., the last of the 19 was walked out through the mudroom and into the gray March light. The transport vans pulled forward. The blankets were distributed. 11 of the 19 were transported by ambulance to a regional medical center in Chillicothe. 8 were transported in the HSI vans. Federal victim advocates from the Cincinnati field office had been staged at the medical center since 5 a.m. The phone calls to searching families began at approximately 8:30 a.m. One of those families had been waiting since November 3, 2025. That was when 2 of the recovered had last been seen, 135 days before the breach. 135 days. Put yourself in that family's position for a moment. 135 days of calls to the sheriff's office. 135 days of a bedroom kept exactly as it was. 135 days of checking a phone. And then, on a Tuesday morning in March, the phone rings. The 4 individuals taken into custody were transported to the Vinton County Jail and later transferred to federal detention. A federal grand jury in Columbus returned a multi-count indictment within 10 days. The charges included conspiracy, unlawful restraint, and additional federal counts that the U.S. Attorney's Office described in a public filing as the full available federal charging framework for a case of this nature. The 4 defendants are identified in public filings by initials only, pursuant to ongoing protective orders. None had prior federal records. 2 had prior state-level encounters, a misdemeanor citation and a dismissed civil complaint, neither of which had generated federal attention. They were not known to any standing federal task force. They had not appeared in any intelligence database. They were, by every prior indication, invisible. The indictment noted that the Coonpath Road property had been the operational site for at least 46 days. Agents were not able to establish, through physical evidence alone, whether the victims had been present at any other location prior to Coonpath Road. 3 of the recovered had been reported missing from 2 different Ohio counties, Hocking and Meigs, in the prior year. The remaining 16 had not been reported missing at all. That detail appeared in a single footnote in the case affidavit and generated almost no public coverage at the time. 16 of the 19 had not been reported missing. That number sits in the case file without explanation. The investigation continues. In the days immediately following the breach, agents working the forensic sweep of the property began the slow work of establishing who the 16 unreported individuals were and where they had come from. Victim advocates from 3 separate federal regions coordinated intake interviews, working through forensic specialists trained in trauma-informed questioning. The process was slow by design, Not a series of rapid interrogations, but careful conversations conducted over multiple sessions, in facilities away from the Coonpath Road area, in settings chosen specifically to lower environmental stress. What emerged from those interviews, in fragments assembled across several weeks and summarized in sealed portions of the case file, was a picture of how invisible a person can become without ever being officially reported as gone. Several of the 16 had come from circumstances documented in the victim advocate intake summaries only in the broadest terms permitted under protective orders, where the adults responsible for reporting them were either unable, unwilling, or themselves part of the network that had moved them. Some had last had contact with any institutional system months before they appeared in the Coonpath Road property. No school enrollment, no medical record, no interaction with any county services office. They had existed in that gray zone between the edges of every system designed to catch them, and none of those systems had registered an absence, because none of them had registered a presence in the first place. That is the harder problem. The case that produced the warrant, the breach, the 90-second stack, that case was solvable because 2 of the 19 had briefly surfaced in the school enrollment system in October before being pulled back out. Those 2 names, those 2 enrollment records, those 2 rows in an attendance database were what gave SSA Renner something to flag. Without them, the entire chain that produced the warrant would have had to start somewhere else. Whether it would have started at all is a question the case file does not answer. The search warrant execution and subsequent forensic sweep of the property produced a case exhibit list running to over 300 items. Among them, the false wall itself, cataloged as a structural modification with no permit record, constructed with materials consistent with purchases at 2 separate hardware stores in Jackson County over the preceding year. Investigators traced the material purchases through store surveillance and loyalty card records, a method that mirrored exactly the same investigative technique that had cracked the grocery store pattern in the first place. The same thread, pulled twice. What's most surprising about this case isn't the scale of what was hidden, it's how ordinary the infrastructure was. No sophisticated technology, no elaborate cover. Just a plywood partition, a padlocked door, and a house that kept its curtains drawn. The entire concealment architecture relied on a single assumption, that no one would look closely enough to question what the numbers were saying. A propane tank did not cooperate with that assumption. The case also surfaced a secondary network question that the indictment leaves partially open. Physical evidence at the property included documentation pointing to at least 2 other addresses in southeastern Ohio, one in Meigs County, one in Lawrence County, that had been used in some capacity connected to the operation. Agents executed consent searches at both addresses in the days following the Coonpath breach. Neither produced additional victims. Both produced evidence that was incorporated into the grand jury proceedings. Whether those addresses represent prior operational sites, staging locations, or something else entirely, has not been established in any public filing as of this date. Unpopular opinion, and we'll say it plainly, the 3 welfare check refusals at this property represent a protocol failure that deserves more scrutiny than it has received in the coverage of this case. The deputies who responded acted within their guidelines. The guidelines were inadequate. A verbal response through a closed door is not a welfare check, it is a courtesy call. When a check is triggered by an enrollment anomaly involving the missing, the standard should require visual confirmation of the individuals named in the concern. It did not. It still does not, in most Ohio counties. 46 days is a long time for a protocol gap to remain unchallenged. That is what this case tells us about the systems we rely on. The propane driver, CW1, has not been publicly identified. He gave a voluntary statement to federal investigators on February 19, 2026. He declined victim advocate services. He was not a victim, and declined any further formal role in the case. His route sheet, with the notation wrong draw, is cataloged as Exhibit 14 in the case file. Federal investigators noted in internal communications, later summarized in the public affidavit, that without CW1's call to the sheriff's office on February 18th, the Athens resident agency's preliminary inquiry file would not have been formally elevated for at least several more weeks. The propane anomaly was already in Kellum's working notes, but it lacked a corroborating civilian witness. His call provided the external confirmation that shifted the inquiry's priority classification. A route sheet. A phone call. 47 seconds at a propane tank. We dug through the full operational timeline, the route logs, the utility subpoenas, the thermal reconnaissance records, and here's what didn't make the news coverage of this case. There were at least 3 separate moments where the investigation could have stalled. The first was the 16-day lag in the school attendance system. The second was the structural drawings gap. If the advance element hadn't located the 2017 service record, the breach plan would have gone in blind to the false wall's exact position. The third was a warrant review period that came within hours of extending into a second week, which would have pushed the operational window past a calendar constraint in the HRT deployment schedule. 3 near misses. Any one of them could have delayed the end of those 46 days by weeks. The 4 defendants are awaiting trial as of this recording. The federal docket lists trial scheduling hearings through the summer of 2026. Under federal sentencing guidelines, the charges as filed carry potential sentences measured in decades. The defendants have each entered not guilty pleas. Federal defenders have filed preliminary motions challenging the warrant's evidentiary foundation, specifically whether a propane draw anomaly constitutes sufficient probable cause under the Fourth Amendment's particularity requirement. The magistrate's warrant stands, pending appellate review. The Meigs County and Lawrence County addresses remain under active federal investigation. No additional arrests have been made in connection with those addresses as of the public record available at this date. One of the things that does not appear in any official filing, because it is not the kind of detail that appears in official filings, is what happened at the medical center in Chillicothe on the morning of March 17th after the phone calls went out. A family drove 3 hours in under 2.5 hours. The federal record doesn't note how long it took after the call for them to arrive, or what the first moment looked like in the family reunification suite at the hospital. Those details belong to the family. They are not federal property. What the federal record does note, in a single line in the victim advocate's intake log, is the time the reunification was documented as complete, 9:41 a.m. 2 hours and 4 minutes after the false wall came down. The house on Coonpath Ridge Road was posted with federal seizure notice and sealed as a crime scene on the afternoon of March 17th. The mailbox at the end of the gravel lane, the one that hadn't been emptied in weeks, still has mail in it, according to a county assessment filed in April. The case that closed that house was built from a utility reading, a grocery receipt, a school district gap, and a civilian who wrote 2 words on a piece of paper before making a phone call he wasn't required to make. The network this property was part of, its geography, its operators beyond the 4 individuals charged, its connection to the addresses in Meigs and Lawrence counties, has not been fully mapped. The investigation is ongoing. The case file is open. The demand that created what agents found behind that false wall did not end when the wall came down. 19 of the missing came home. The rest of the questions are still being answered. Will the systems that failed 3 welfare checks be reformed before the next case reaches 46 days? Comment yes or no, because that is the question this investigation actually leaves open, and it is one that has a real answer if enough people are